Ever wonder why silence makes people so uncomfortable? Ancient civilizations feared it so much they created rituals, myths, and even gods just to fill the quiet. And guess what? We're still doing the same thing today. Scrolling, posting, and talking just to avoid silence. Tonight, let's talk about the fear of silence and why it has followed humanity since the beginning of time. Episode 9: Why Ancient Civilizations Feared Silence. What is up, Sleepless Society, and welcome back to the corner of the internet where we overthink the things we never think about. Tonight, we are diving headfirst into the abyss of quiet. It's something we all run from. That awkward pause in a conversation, the dead air when your headphones die, the unnerving stillness of a house at 3 a.m. We are a species absolutely addicted to noise. But this isn't a new problem. This isn't about your TikTok addiction or your Spotify playlist. This fear is ancient. It's written into our DNA, our myths, in our history. So grab your beverage of choice, get comfortable, and let's explore why humanity has always been, and still is, terrified of a little peace and quiet. Chapter 1: The Sound of Survival. To really get this, we have to go way back, and I mean way back, before cities, before writing, before your great, you get the picture. Picture the world as it was for our earliest ancestors, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years ago, on the vast, open savannas of Africa. This wasn't a world of convenience. It was a world of constant, low-level anxiety. Every single day was a game of survival, and the rule book was written in sound. For early humans, the world was an orchestra of information. Sound was data. The gentle rustling of leaves could mean a harmless breeze, but it could also be the sound of a predator, a giant cat or a prehistoric bear stalking its next meal. The chirping of birds was a good sign. It meant things were calm. But if those birds suddenly went silent, that was an alarm bell. A sudden, sharp quiet was nature's universal signal for danger. It meant a major predator was nearby, and all the smaller animals knew to freeze and shut up. Silence didn't mean peace. It meant the tiger had entered the room. Our ancestors, the ones who survived to pass on their genes to us, were the ones who were paranoid. They were the ones who heard that silence and immediately thought, something is wrong. And their hearts would start pounding, adrenaline would flood their system, and they'd prepare for fight or flight. This reaction is deep-seated. It's a primal instinct. The humans who enjoyed the quiet and thought, oh, lovely, a moment of peace. Well, they probably didn't last very long. They were the ones who got eaten. So we are literally the descendants of the most anxious, noise-attuned hominids. Think about our biology. Our sense of hearing is incredible. We can perceive a massive range of frequencies, far more than many other species. And our ears are particularly sensitive to sudden changes in sound, a snap, a crackle, a pop. Why? Because those were the sounds that mattered. The snap of a twig under a heavy paw, the crackle of fire where it shouldn't be. This biological programming is still with us. It's why a sudden loud noise makes you jump out of your skin. Your ancient brain is screaming, predator, even if it's just your roommate dropping a pan in the kitchen. But just as we're wired to react to noise, we are also wired to be deeply suspicious of its absence. This constant environmental monitoring, what scientists call auditory surveillance, was a full-time job for our ancestors. And in that environment, silence was the equivalent of a server crash. All your data is gone, and you have no idea what's happening. It's pure uncertainty, and the brain hates uncertainty more than almost anything. So what was the solution? How do you fight back against a world where silence equals death? You make your own noise. You create a bubble of sound, a sonic territory that you control. This is where the first human technologies of sound come in. And I'm not just talking about language. Let's start with the most basic, the campfire. We think of fire as a source of warmth and light, a place to cook food, but it was also a source of sound. The constant, gentle crackling and hissing of a campfire is one of the most comforting sounds to the human brain. There are studies showing that listening to the sound of a campfire can lower blood pressure and reduce anxiety. Why? Because for millennia, that sound was the sound of safety. It meant you had a defensible position. The light kept predators at bay, and the sound masked the smaller, more frightening noises coming from the darkness just beyond your camp. The fire was a shield made of sound. It was a constant, predictable noise in an unpredictable world. It told your primal brain, you are safe, you can relax, the monsters are staying away. Then you have the human voice itself. Before complex language, our ancestors would have used chants, hums, and rhythmic calls. This wasn't just idle chatter. It served a vital social function. It was a way of saying, I am here, you're there, we are together, we are safe. It built community cohesion. Think of a mother humming to her baby. That sound is a primal signal of comfort and security. It reassures the infant that they are not alone. Early human groups would have used communal chants and songs for the same reason, to reinforce social bonds and create a sense of collective identity and security. It was a way of pushing back the vast, scary silence of the wilderness with the sound of their own unity. And, of course, they created instruments. Some of the oldest known musical instruments are flutes made from bird bone and mammoth ivory, dating back over 40,000 years. The first percussion instruments weren't complex drums. They were probably just two rocks being clapped together, or sticks beaten against a log. Why did they do this? Was it just for fun? For art? Partly yes, but it was also a powerful survival tool. Rhythmic, predictable noise is a declaration of presence and control. It imposes human order on the chaotic sounds of nature. It's a way of marking territory. We are here, the drumbeat says. This spot is ours. We are organized. We are strong. It could be used to coordinate group activities, like a hunt. It could be used in rituals to create a powerful, shared emotional experience. And it could be used to simply scare things away. A lot of animals are naturally wary of loud, rhythmic sounds they don't understand. So a drumcircle wasn't just a party. It was an ancient form of a home security system. So let's bring it to today. You're sitting at your desk trying to work, and your coworker is tapping their pen. Click, click, click. Or they're humming, or they're constantly talking, filling every available second of air with noise. It might be annoying, sure, but what you're really witnessing is a 10,000-year-old survival instinct playing out in a modern office. Their brain, on some deep, unconscious level, is just trying to make sure a saber-toothed tiger doesn't sneak up on the water cooler. They are fighting off the terrifying silence, just as our ancestors did around a crackling fire. It's a reminder that the modern human brain is still running on some very, very old software. And that software has one main directive: silence is suspicious. Chapter 2. Silence as a threat in ancient beliefs. Okay, so our earliest ancestors had a very practical reason to fear the quiet. They didn't want to be lunch. But as humans evolved and formed complex societies, our fears evolved too. They became more abstract, more supernatural. The predators were no longer just lions and bears. They were demons, ghosts, and angry gods. And in this new world of belief, silence wasn't just a sign of danger. It was an invitation. It was a void that evil things could rush into. Let's take a trip to ancient Egypt. The Egyptians had one of the most detailed and elaborate belief systems about the afterlife ever created. And in their worldview, sound and silence held immense power. Their underworld, the Duat, was a dangerous and terrifying place that the soul of the deceased had to navigate. It was filled with monstrous gods, terrifying beasts, and gates guarded by demons. And parts of this journey were characterized by a profound, deathly silence. The god of the dead himself, Osiris, was often called the Lord of Silence. This wasn't a peaceful, meditative silence. It was the chilling, eternal silence of the grave. The Egyptians believed that words, especially spoken words, had creative power. Spells, or heka, had to be spoken aloud correctly to have any effect. In the various funerary texts, like the Book of the Dead, the deceased is given specific incantations to recite to overcome the challenges of the underworld. The act of speaking the right words was a weapon. Therefore, being rendered silent was to be rendered powerless, helpless before the horrors of the duat. This fear manifested in their rituals for the living, too. Their temples were not quiet, contemplative places. They were filled with the sounds of sistrums, a type of sacred rattle, as well as chanting, singing, and musical instruments like harps and lutes. These sounds were meant to please the gods and, just as importantly, to ward off evil forces. The god Bes, a grotesque but protective dwarf deity, was often depicted playing music or dancing, and his image was used to scare away evil spirits. The noise was a form of spiritual purification, a way of cleansing a space and making it sacred. Silence, on the other hand, was associated with the desolation of the desert, a place of chaos and death that surrounded their fertile, noisy civilization along the Nile. Now, let's head over to Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. If you think the Egyptian afterlife sounded rough, the Mesopotamian version was even worse. Their underworld was a bleak, dusty, and silent place known as the Land of No Return. It was a shadowy realm where the dead existed as pale, miserable spirits, eating dust and clay. There was no judgment, no reward, just an eternity of gloomy, soundless existence. This profoundly depressing view of the afterlife made them terrified of anything that reminded them of it. They believed the world was swarming with demons and angry ghosts who could cause disease, misfortune, and death. These entities were thought to be drawn to stillness and quiet. Rituals to exorcise these demons were loud affairs, involving the banging of drums, the shouting of incantations by priests, and the use of bells and cymbals. They were literally trying to scare the evil spirits away with a wall of sound. If your house got too quiet, especially at night, it wasn't peaceful. It was a sign that you were vulnerable. It meant the protective bubble of human noise had popped, and anything could creep in from the silent, spiritual darkness. This idea wasn't unique to them. Let's jump over to ancient Greece. The Greeks also had a healthy fear of the supernatural. They believed in things like miasma, a kind of spiritual pollution or stain that could be caused by wrongdoing and attract misfortune. How did you cleanse a space of miasma? With rituals that often involved sound. They used bells and bronze instruments in purification ceremonies, believing that the ringing, metallic sound had the power to drive away malevolent spirits. This is an idea called apotropaic magic, using something to ward off evil. And the sound of bronze was considered especially powerful. In many myths, heroes are tormented by silent furies or ghosts, and rituals involving noise are needed to appease them. The underworld of Hades, while having its noisy rivers of woe, also had vast silent fields where the shades of the dead wandered aimlessly. Silence was the state of being after life and agency had been stripped away. So here's the sarcastic twist. Basically, for most of ancient history, if your party got too quiet, people genuinely thought demons were about to RSVP and show up at the door. It wasn't just a mood killer, it was a potential spiritual crisis. And let's be honest, we haven't really shaken this. Why do we leave the TV on for background noise when we're home alone? Why do we put on a podcast to do chores or a Spotify playlist to take a shower? Why do we feel the need to fill every second of our car rides with music or talk radio? We are still performing our own modern secular rituals to ward off the creepy silence. The silence that makes the house feel too big, too empty. The silence that lets you hear every creak and groan of the floorboards and makes your imagination run wild. We're not necessarily afraid of Mesopotamian demons anymore, but we are afraid of that feeling of vulnerability, of being alone with the unknown. We've just swapped out bronze bells and sacred chants for Netflix and true crime podcasts. It's the same instinct, just with better technology. We are still trying to prove to the darkness that we are here, that we are in control, and that we are not alone. Chapter 3. The Politics of Silence. We've talked about survival in the wild and survival in the spiritual world, but there's a third battlefield where silence has always been a weapon and a threat, the world of human power and politics. For kings, emperors, and rulers throughout history, a silent population wasn't always a good thing. Sometimes, it was the scariest sound of all. Let's go to ancient Rome, the ultimate hub of political noise. The Roman Forum wasn't just a marketplace. It was the political, legal, and social heart of the Republic, and later the Empire. And it was designed to be loud. Imagine it. You have senators giving passionate, booming speeches from the rostra to sway public opinion. You have merchants hawking their goods in the open air, and the constant hum of thousands of citizens gossiping, debating, and making deals. This noise was the sound of a functioning state. It was the sound of engagement, of participation. A ruler could walk through a noisy forum and feel the pulse of the city. But what would a silent forum mean? It would mean fear. It would mean discontent. It would mean something was deeply wrong. Roman leaders were masters of using noise and spectacle to control the population. The famous policy of bread and circuses wasn't just about giving people food and entertainment. It was about keeping them distracted with the roar of the crowd at the Colosseum, the clash of gladiators' swords, the thunder of chariot races at the Circus Maximus. These spectacles were a form of sensory overload. They were so loud, so overwhelming, that they left little room for critical thought or quiet conversation. A cheering crowd is a compliant crowd. A population obsessed with the latest games is not a population quietly plotting a rebellion. The noise was a tool of social control. As the historian Tacitus would later write during the more oppressive days of the empire, a climate of fear created a forced silence. People were afraid to speak their minds for fear of being accused of treason. In this context, silence in the Senate wasn't a sign of consensus, it was a sign of tyranny. The silence of the people wasn't peace, it was submission. But for any emperor, the ultimate nightmare was a different kind of quiet. The silence of conspiracy. The whispered plots happening in the dark corners of villas, the quiet exchange of glances between senators. That's the silence that could get you killed. Because nothing's scarier to a king than a group of peasants who have suddenly stopped complaining and are just quietly making eye contact. This political fear of silence is a universal theme. Let's look at medieval Europe. In a world where most people couldn't read or write, information was controlled through sound. The town crier was an essential figure of authority. He would ring a large, loud handbell to command attention before shouting out royal edicts, new laws, and official news. This was a top-down flow of information. The authorities spoke, and the people listened. It was a way of dominating the soundscape of a town, ensuring the official narrative drowned out any quiet rumors or dissenting opinions. The ringing of church bells also controlled the rhythm of daily life, telling people when to wake, when to work, and when to pray. This was an acoustic form of power. Silence was an absence of that control. A quiet mob was an unpredictable mob. A village that fell silent when a tax collector arrived was a village on the brink of revolt. We can see this in imperial China as well. In the Forbidden City, the emperor's court was governed by incredibly strict rules of etiquette. Silence was often a sign of respect and reverence for the emperor's divine status. Unsanctioned noise could get you executed. This was silence as a tool of absolute power, creating an aura of awe and fear. However, the emperor and his officials were also deeply suspicious of silence among the vast population. They had a complex network of spies and informants to listen for whispers of rebellion in tea houses and villages. They knew that a silent province could be a province that was secretly organizing an uprising. The silence of the masses was an information vacuum, and a ruler's greatest fear is not knowing what his people are really thinking. This dynamic is still so relevant today. Think about a modern office environment. A loud, buzzing office is usually seen as a place of productivity and collaboration. But what happens when a controversial new policy is announced and the room goes dead silent? That silence is packed with information. It's full of disagreement, anxiety, and resentment. The boss who ignores that silence does so at their own peril. It's a form of quiet, collective protest. The silent treatment in a personal relationship is another example. It's not an absence of communication, it is the communication. It's a power move designed to punish and control by creating an uncomfortable void. We see it in classrooms, in negotiations, and in family dinners. An awkward silence can completely shift the power dynamic in a room, making everyone feel tense and forcing someone to break it. We still use silence as a political tool to show dissent, to assert dominance, or to signal a threat. We are still, in our own small ways, playing the same games of power and quiet that Roman emperors and medieval kings once did. Chapter 4. Why we still fear silence today. So here we are. We've journeyed through prehistory, ancient religions, and the corridors of power, and it all leads back to this moment, right now. You're likely listening to this with headphones, or have it playing in your home, actively choosing to fill your space with sound. The saber-toothed tigers are gone, the ancient demons are mostly gone, and for the most part we don't live in fear of a tyrannical emperor silencing us. So why are we still so deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with quiet? The final chapter of this story is about psychology. The fear is no longer outside of us, it's inside us. In our modern world, we are living in an era of unprecedented noise and stimulation. The average person is bombarded with more information in a single day than someone in the 15th century would have encountered in their entire lifetime. Our phones are constantly buzzing with notifications. Social media feeds are an endless scroll of videos, opinions, and advertisements. There's always another episode to watch, another podcast to listen to, another song to stream. Our brains have become conditioned to this constant input. We've trained ourselves to be information junkies. Neurologically, our brains adapt to this environment by developing a higher baseline for stimulation. When that stimulation is suddenly taken away, it feels like withdrawal. The quiet feels jarring, empty, and even stressful. Our brain, deprived of its usual fix of external noise, doesn't know what to do with itself. This creates a feeling of anxiety and restlessness. We feel bored, but it's a deeper boredom, an existential discomfort. We reach for our phones not because we need to see something specific, but just to fill the void, to silence the silence. This fear of quiet is so common, it even has names like sedatophobia or echophobia, and a huge part of it is social. Humans are social creatures. We are wired to connect. In conversation, silence can feel like a rupture in that connection. A pause that goes on for a second too long can trigger a cascade of anxious thoughts. Did I say something wrong? Are they mad at me? Am I boring them? This is so awkward. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, and in a social context, the expected pattern is a back-and-forth exchange. When that pattern is broken by silence, our brain's error detection circuits fire up. We interpret the silence as a social signal, and we often default to the worst-case scenario. This is why so many of us are fillers, people who will say anything, no matter how trivial, just to avoid a conversational lull. We use noise as a social lubricant to keep the machinery of interaction running smoothly. But the biggest, scariest reason we fear silence is because when the outside world gets quiet, the inside world gets incredibly loud. All the thoughts, worries, anxieties, and regrets that we successfully keep at bay with our daily distractions suddenly have a megaphone. The silence forces us to confront ourselves. You're left alone with your internal monologue, your own personal narrator. And for a lot of us, that narrator can be pretty harsh. It's the voice that reminds you of that embarrassing thing you did 10 years ago, the one that lists all your insecurities, the one that brings up your deepest fears about the future. In a way, it's not the silence that's scary. It's being stuck in a room with your own thoughts, like a horror movie being directed, produced, and screened by your own brain. Our constant engagement with media is a highly effective and highly addictive form of self-medication. We're not just scrolling through Instagram, we're actively running away from ourselves. Research on the brain's default mode network, or DMN, sheds light on this. The DMN is a network of brain regions that becomes active when we are not focused on the outside world, when we are daydreaming or letting our minds wander. This is the network responsible for self-reflection, personal memories, and thinking about the future. But for people with anxiety or depression, the DMN can get stuck in a loop of negative rumination. So for them, silence literally turns up the volume on their worst thoughts. It's no wonder they seek constant distraction. But, and this is the crucial final point, while we are evolutionarily and psychologically primed to fear silence, learning to embrace it might be one of the most important skills we can develop in the modern world. Forcing ourselves to sit in the quiet is like exercising a muscle we've let atrophy. At first, it's uncomfortable, but over time, it gets easier. Practices like mindfulness and meditation are essentially training in the art of being silent. They teach you to observe your thoughts without judgment, to let them come and go without letting them control you. And the benefits are incredible. Studies have shown that spending time in silence can lead to reduced stress, improved focus, and enhanced creativity. It can even promote actual physical changes in the brain, like the development of new cells in the hippocampus, a region associated with learning and memory. In a world that is constantly screaming for your attention, actively choosing silence is not an act of vulnerability, it is an act of power. It's a way of reclaiming your own mind from the noise. It's how we move from a state of frantic reaction to one of calm intention. So if you made it this far, you're basically braver than the entire Roman Empire. You've sat through a long talk about nothing, which is really a talk about everything. So here's your challenge. Find a few minutes today to just be quiet. No phone, no music, no TV. Just you and the silence. See what happens. It might be scary at first, but it might be the most honest conversation you have all day. Thank you for hanging out with me tonight in the Sleepless Society. If you enjoyed this deep dive, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below about a time when silence totally freaked you out, and maybe check out the next episode in our series right here. Until then, don't be scared of the quiet. It might just be the only honest sound left. Stay curious, everyone.